HU taking a 3-0 win over JMU this past week. And, with that, they did, in fact, take a perfect 7-0 with a perfect map score of 21-0 in the group stage for their NACE Star League group. HU's got to be feeling pretty good after getting such a very strong start to their season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with their undefeated record and everything, it actually gets them a first round bye in the playoffs. So I'm sure that they're definitely going to favor that and enjoy a little break, a little time off before they have to punch it into high gear.
Them going into their group stage playoffs, they are going to face either JMU, the team that they just beat up on 3-0, or the team that they played last week, Maryland, who they also beat in the finals of the group stage for a place at those playoffs. So, you got to be thinking, they've swept both of these teams, in the past. Are they really going to be pushing, that far forward to try and just solidify their place in the playoffs and show, yeah, we're a good team, come out and respect us? Or is it going to possibly be something more along the lines of, what we saw from during the in that match against JMU? They weren't playing exactly their best, but still good enough to where they were showing that they were a very dominant team. Last week, which was supposed to be our original cast, was a forfeit win versus University of Montreal, which ended up placing them second in the group standings and fifth overall off of win-loss, followed by average win time this season. So, placed second in the group, that gives them a decent seeding going into the playoffs. They were given the 8th seed going off of the rules that Collegiate League of Legends has decided on. And they are going to be facing the Rochester Institute of Technology in the first round. My biggest thing for this HU League of Legends team right now is they haven't played a competitive match in over 2 weeks. That's got to be taking some steam out of them. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And to kind of highlight the topic on that, HU will play their first game or their first round of playoffs against, I believe, the number 9th seed. But then
Correct.
If they win that game, their next opponent could potentially be the University of Toronto, which is the number 1 seed. So that will be a very interesting matchup to see how, whether HU is dominant or not, how they will play against the realistically probably most dominant team being the University of Toronto.
As for their current opponent, their upcoming opponent, Rochester went 5-2 in their group stage, finishing third, hence why they are now in the 9th position, or in the 9th seed rather. And they seem to favor the long game. Most of their wins have come beyond 30 minutes. I think only 1 or 2 games that they won fell under that time point, but not by much. And, as we've seen from HU, they very much prefer the early game. So you basically have two teams that vary in very different aspects of the game. They excel in 2 very different aspects of the game. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how they match up against one another.
Yeah, and I know that me and you talked off air a little bit about, the matchups and how the early versus late game situation with HU could potentially favor or not favor them. And I think, honestly, I think a team that's a little more prepared for the later game might be able to hold off HU. But on the counterpoint of that, there's always the extra aggression that HU can bring out. We've seen it from games past. They are just so aggressive that even the teams that are more prepped for the later games, they will still win just because they don't know how to deal with the extra aggression from HU.
The Overwatch League is finally going to be coming back into swing after a few months off, with their Pro-Am tournament starting in just under a week on the 23rd of March. Fans probably been looking forward to getting back into the season of Overwatch League, rooting for their home teams, rooting for their favorite players. And this is going to be our first main look at teams this season. They have new rosters, some teams have moved back and forth between regions. But my main thing, especially since this is just a pro amateur tournament, do you think teams are going to be taking this as seriously as they would a regular league match?
I think it's interesting, honestly. I think It really depends on, honestly, I think that it mostly depends on the discipline of the team and the discipline of the coach. Hopefully teams take this as seriously as, a normal league match. And maybe you're going to have teams that want to try out new things, still against top tier level competition. And maybe these are the matches where they'll say, oh, hey, let's try this new thing we've been working on. It seems like it's been working so far, but we don't really know. Let's try it against people that we know it will either work or fail against.
The other thing to mention, I believe there are currently 5 groups scheduled for play over the next few weeks. Groups being made up of 3 Overwatch League and 2 amateur teams, most of them coming from the Overwatch Path to Pro, and I think specifically contenders. And something I noticed just looking at the groups is that the reigning champs, the Dallas Fuel, after moving to the East region, are not going to be playing this tournament. Obviously, the Pro-Am is a West region tournament, so, thinking that the San Francisco Shock are going to be playing it, they were the runners-up last year, is that going to maybe sway power rankings a little bit? Maybe get people to push San Francisco Shock over Dallas Fuel, just going off of them being able to actually see the Shock playing early.
Yeah, I think for the Shock, I think they have all the opportunity in their hands right now, right? If they come out and they dominate the Pro-Ams and they prove that they are the best or deserve to be in that conversation of the best with Dallas, then I think that the favor might swing towards them a little bit. But I also think for the teams coming up from Path to Pro and contenders and all that, this is your time to shine, right? This is arguably one of the best teams in the Overwatch League. If they can come out and upset the Shock, or even just prove that they can hang with them and handle them a little bit, I think that's huge for these contender teams coming up.
Yeah, I think the big thing with this is that these contenders teams have a lot to win and basically nothing to lose coming into this tournament. Wanted to talk a little bit about Rocket League, correct?
Yeah, so going into Rocket League here to touch on that. So they just ended the fall split in Major, Gen.G taking the number 1 spot, which Gen.G was the favorite, so it doesn't really surprise any of the Rocket League fans there. The interesting thing is the top 3 for that tournament was probably a little out of the ordinary for most Rocket League fans. We had Gen.G finishing first, Moist Esports actually coming back and finishing second. Patrick, if you're familiar with Moist, is very interesting because they were a very dominant team in the Rocket League scene, and they had fell off a little bit. Not completely, not like they were not qualifying in major tournaments and things like that, but had gone through some roster moves and fell off a little bit. And then Team Secret closing out third, which was very interesting because I'm not even familiar with that roster, to be honest with you. I couldn't tell you the names of the people on that roster. I don't know if I've ever even really heard of the team outside of this split and major of the RLCS. So the RLCS will be coming back for the winter split and major coming up. But Patrick, I want to ask you something, and not that you'll be able to relate to Rocket League very much, but when we look at roster moves in teams, and this is going to apply to any esport, how do you think that affects the other players already on that team?
So I think, because correct me if I'm wrong, Rocket League teams normally only consist of like 3 or 4 players, correct?
Correct. Most teams are a coach, the 3 starters, and then maybe a sub. So
especially with a smaller overall roster, I think that's going to play much more into losing a significant amount of chemistry that your team's had. Be it losing a player and getting a new one, or basically, or losing 2 new teammates and getting 2 new ones. Even if you're still under the same name, having to deal with learning new play styles, new personalities, basically trying to basically rebuild what is basically almost from scratch with a new player, especially I would imagine in Rocket League, where that game is so dependent on chemistry because there's only 3 of you against 3 of the enemy on such a small confined field. I think that's going to play much more heavily than, say, a roster change in the likes of Overwatch, where, League of Legends, where you have 5 players per team. I almost said Overwatch has 6. goes to show how much of Overwatch 2 I've played, which is exactly none, by the way. So, I think you're going to see, I think roster moves, generally speaking, take more of an effect on esports with lower overall player counts per team. That being said, something that I've noticed in esports in general is that roster moves are very much the standard. It's not very often that a team will have like a franchise player, if you will. Looking over at the side of League of Legends, you have Faker, basically the most iconic player of SK Telecom T1. So he is basically the face of that franchise. We don't really see that with a lot of other esports or with a lot of other teams. So, I've seen that argument used, like, should esports teams be looking to play or to get more franchise players?
Yeah, and so I think to relate this back to Rocket League, the really interesting thing about Rocket League is we've had in the past teams that will disband, or roster moves that will happen just because of players want to go play with their friends. They have people that they play with that they consider friends at the top tier level, and they will simply say, I don't want to be on this team anymore because I want the opportunity to go play with my best friend who is on another competitive team.